Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Sound Decisions here on Passion for Sound. I've been asked a few times about the DC offset mod in the Singxer SA-1 amp, so I thought I'd put together a relatively quick video explaining what this modification is, how easy it is to do, show you some footage of how to do it yourself, and explain the benefits that I think are achievable by doing the mod. Now, to make this really clear in case you've never heard of anything like this before, what we're talking about here is that many, maybe most amps are built with protections in place to prevent there from being pure DC sound, which is sort of a strong, high singular voltage coming through rather than the normal alternating current of a sound wave. They're designed to protect from that sort of noise coming through, potentially blowing the circuit of the amp, but even more worryingly, potentially blowing up your headphones. In the case of the SA-1 from Singxer, that protection has been built in such a way that you can actually bypass it relatively easily and very cheaply. And so in a moment I'll show you how to do it and talk about the benefits, but first I want to cover off briefly what DC offset is all about and what risks you're facing if you do this mod to the SA-1. To be really clear, I'm not recommending that anybody goes and modifies their products unless they know exactly what they're doing and are prepared to face the risks that follow. But to help out with that, if you're on the fence, you're trying to make up your own mind, what I'm going to share with you is some information that Gino from Gishelli Labs was kind enough to share with me when I asked him about what DC offset is all about. So to be really clear once again, Gino is not recommending you make these modifications, I'm not recommending you make these modifications, and neither of us are taking any responsibility for any damage that you may cause if you start modifying your gear. Gino was also not specifically talking about the SA-1, I asked him about DC offset in general coming from DACs. And that's generally what this is all about, is that it's theoretically possible that a DAC that's either poorly designed or has failed could send pure DC through to your amplifier, and that's where the problem begins. The reason for that, as Gino explained to me, is that many of the DAC chips on the market operate only with positive voltages. So for instance, it might be working on, say, a 0 to 4 volt scale of output, and then what happens is within the output stage of the DAC, that 0 to 4 volt fluctuation, which is actually the sound wave, gets moved down by, say, 2 volts, and it then becomes a -2 to +2 voltage, which is what your amplifier is expecting to see as a normal analog waveform, where the sound has both negative and positive phase. So in speaking of Gino, what he explained was that almost every DAC on the market is going to have a design that prevents DC offset because of the general nature of how they're designed. What is not guaranteed though is that there could potentially be a failure within the DAC that could cause DC to come out. If you went and modified a DAC, something like the output caps for instance, that could lead to DC coming out of the DAC. So there are situations where it could happen, but it is fairly unlikely. So I just wanted to cover that off. First of all, what DC offset is, which is that pure DC voltage coming out of the DAC, and the fact that it's normally going to be unlikely unless you have product or component failure or you've made modifications. Or if you've bought some random DIY or low quality DAC, then there might be a risk. But from reputable, well-known manufacturers, there should generally be no problems. And so that leads us to the modification of the SA-1. What you're doing with the SA-1 modification is just bypassing the pieces they've put in place to absorb and protect the amp should it meet a pure DC signal coming in. In other words, by removing this, you are meaning that you're exposing the amp potentially and your headphones potentially to permanent damage should there be a catastrophic failure or extreme DC delivery coming from the DAC. But as I said, it is unlikely, so you are taking a risk. Any risk you take here is your own, but I wanted to share with you the process involved and all of the information about the level of risk so you can make up your own mind. This modification's been talked about by multiple reviewers, it's on multiple websites, and it is a modification that, as I said before, is easy and can have some impact. And so before I tell you about the impact, what I might do is show you my dodgy headcam footage of me actually doing the mod myself. Now I want to apologise for the quality of the footage. I've had to zoom in a fair bit, so some of it gets a bit blurry. It's obviously a bit shaky because it's headcam footage and I'm not familiar with wearing a headcam. I was also in the middle of testing a whole bunch of gear when I took the footage, and so when I do move my head around, you may see an absolute pile of mess. So I apologise for that. It's one of the issues with me juggling a day job as well as trying to do the channel within my office. So I apologise for that, but let me show you now the process of bypassing the DC offset protection in the SA-1. Oh, but before I do, I should mention the little thing that I'm using when I'm doing the modification is called a shunt. It's designed specifically for going across jumper switches. I'll show you in the headcam footage, but it's not particularly clear. So here's an image on screen so you can see what a shunt looks like. You can normally buy them in bags of 10, 100, 200, and they're very, very cheap. So this is not something where you need to go out and have specialist equipment. Generally speaking, you need a pair of needle nose pliers, ideally some sort of static protection, which I haven't used here, and I recognize that I should have. And then on top of that, you need 4 of those basic little shunts. So now let's take a look at the footage of what's involved. Very simple to get into the SA-1. You're going to go around and take out 6 screws. So 1, 2, 3 on the corner, the other corner, middle, and the back corner. So very straightforward. The screws you need to take out are differentiated from the others that hold the circuit board in place. So the screws you're taking out have this little hex head, whereas the others do have a star head. So we've taken out the 6 screws now, you've got these 6 holes around here. If you then lift the amplifier up carefully, it'll leave the lid behind. What we have here is the amplifier itself. I'm actually going to turn it around this way to make more sense. And the pieces that we're interested in, this is the input circuit here with the volume control. Just behind that, you've got a set of capacitors, and down here, these are little DC offset devices. So what we're going to do is grab a pair of long nose pliers like so, and install jumpers. Now I've got these here because I've been playing around with this before. The jumpers don't come in the amplifier itself, so you will need to buy jumpers of your own. It doesn't matter which way around these go. All that it needs to do is cross over the pins. Now you can do this with your fingers, there's no harm in it. It's just hard to get to sometimes. So we just turn those around and we jump the pins. You can buy these are called shunts. They're designed for specifically for going across the jumper switches that you see here, these pins. And so all we're going to do is make sure we've got 4 shunts available. We're going to line them up in the tweezers or the pliers and just pop them on the pins. And that's all there is. It's a really simple modification. Doesn't take much to do, and there it's in place. So now that that's done, I'm going to do further listening tests, back and forth, removing the shunts, putting the shunts back on to see which way I prefer it. Okay, so having seen that, as you can see, it's a very quick and simple process. You get it done end to end within about 3 or 4 minutes, I suspect. Remember, you are creating a slight amount of risk, which is your own responsibility. Should anything go wrong, you're not going to get any support from Singxer because you are modifying a product that is sealed, and the warranty only applies in the event that that seal is intact. So do be aware of that if you choose to make this mod. If you do though, let me tell you what to expect. I feel like after bypassing the DC offset protection in the SA-1, what I heard was just a slightly better version of the SA-1. And it's really all about the treble for me. The treble quality from the SA-1 is already quite good, but it's definitely better once you remove the offset protection. It improves the clarity, the tonality of the treble information. It comes across as smoother and cleaner and better resolved. Again, it's not leapfrogging the SA-1 out of its kind of mid-tier performance, slightly above mid-tier performance, and up to full-on flagship performance with something like the Soloist or the Aries behind me here. It's not doing that. What I would describe it as doing is getting the absolute maximum quality out of the SA-1. And to put that into more perspective, I grabbed one particular track, listened to the same track before and after, so I had a consistent way of making my notes. The track that I used was Kokomo by Eric Bibb, nothing to do with the Beach Boys one. And in that track, there's lots of really well recorded instruments, there's lots going on, and it gave me a really good insight into exactly what the modification does to the SA-1. And as I've already said, what I heard was a noticeable, so a significant improvement, but not a huge improvement in the top end detail, smoothness, and refinement. In the track Kokomo, there are shakers like the percussion instruments, and obviously there's a snare drum as well, and both of those sorts of sounds became much better resolved and much smoother. They were still crisp and snappy, but they had a smoothness to them that they lacked a little bit with the DC offset protection in place. So it hasn't increased the amount of treble coming through or the amount of any emphasis anywhere, but what it has done is it's improved the sense of resolution and quality, the transparency, if you like, in the treble registers. So you're going to hear a little bit more texture and detail, but not more treble, just better quality treble. Overall, it's a fairly nuanced improvement that I do appreciate, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it if you're uncomfortable with opening up a device that's under warranty and or making modifications that do put your device and your headphones at a little bit of risk. Now, yes, from everything I've read and in speaking to Gino, I do believe the risk is pretty small. I've currently left my amp modified, but I'm not recommending that anyone else does that because you are increasing your risk. So you need to make that decision very carefully on your own. And apologies if I seem to be overcautious about this, but I want to make it incredibly clear that I'm not recommending that anyone do this mod. I'm just providing information for you to make up your own mind. So for me, having done this, it's a modification that I think if you never did it, you'd never miss it. If you choose to do it, you will get some slight benefits. In my mind, it all comes down to your risk profile. If you're willing to take that, 1% risk, whatever it might be, and make the modification, then I do think you can get slightly better sound out of the SA-1, but it doesn't transform the amp. So make sure you weigh that up when you're thinking about the risk versus reward. The risk is fairly small, the reward is fairly small, so it's kind of a wash and it's going to come down to your personal preferences. Either way, I hope this video has been useful to you. I hope it's either left you comfortable that you don't need to make the modification, or it's given you comfort that you can go ahead and make the modification because you're comfortable with the risk level. Either way, I do hope it was helpful. If it was, do think about hitting the subscribe and the like button. It really helps the channel out, and I'm always thankful to those of you that subscribe. And for now, I'll leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.